We are getting some breaking news from Niger. State TV is naming a new coup leader, and that is General Abdurrahman Chiani.
24 hours after the resignation of Malian President Ibrahim Boubacar Keïta, a picture of the country's new leadership comes into sharper focus, with an officer declaring himself head of the junta.
Well, army officers in Burkina Faso have announced the overthrow of military leader Paul-Henri Damiba. Captain Ibrahim Traoré has been declared the new head of the West African country.
Something is shifting in Africa. From the dusty plains of the Sahel, a spark has caught fire. And at the center of it all stands one man, President Ibrahim Traoré of Burkina Faso. He's not just leading a country. He's ignited a movement. A new kind of awakening is pulsing through the veins of an entire continent. But this wave of change has exposed a harsh reality. Across Africa, too many leaders sit comfortably in power, trapped in a system crafted long ago by colonial rulers. It's a system that has failed millions, yet these leaders have grown rich and powerful because of it. So why would they ever want anything to change? Now, people are refusing to stay silent. In city streets and village squares, voices rise in defiance. Protests erupt as ordinary men and women risk everything, demanding freedom and justice. Because for Africa to move forward, one truth remains. These leaders must go. But who exactly are the men clinging so tightly to power? And can the people really win this fight? Stay with us. The answers might surprise you. In June 2025, anger spilled onto the streets of Kenya. Protests erupted across the country, targeting President William Ruto and his administration. It wasn't the first time. Just a year earlier, people had marched against a proposed tax bill. But this time, the spark was far more personal and far more painful. A Kenyan teacher, Albert Ojwang, died while in police custody. His crime? Criticizing a senior police official on social media. That single death lit a fuse that had been smoldering for months. But the real fire burning in Kenya goes deeper than one tragic death. At the heart of the rage stands President William Ruto. Across Africa, there's no shortage of corrupt leaders. But, in our view, President Ruto might be the worst of them all. Why? Because when he first took office, he sold a powerful story. He painted himself as a champion for ordinary Kenyans and for Africans as a whole. Young people looked at him and saw hope. They believed in his tale of the hustler, a man who rose from nothing to build his own wealth. They thought he understood struggle, that he'd stand for the poor and do things differently. Even we praise President Ruto. Pan-African thinkers compared his fiery speeches to those of Gaddafi. There was so much promise, but promises can be broken. And in Kenya, the people are demanding to know, who is William Ruto, really? At first, many believed President William Ruto was an anti-imperialist hero. He spoke boldly, blasting the West and daring to criticize powerful nations. It felt like he was standing up for Africa, but it was all a facade. Just months into his presidency, Ruto began revealing his true colors. The very same Western powers he once condemned were the ones he started courting. There was a time Ruto lashed out at the West for treating African leaders like schoolchildren. He said it was humiliating and disrespectful that, during US-Africa or Europe-Africa summits, 54 African leaders were always the ones flying out to listen to a single foreign president. Ruto declared, with fiery conviction, that he would never attend any summit organized by a foreign nation or group. People applauded him. They thought he was fighting back against the old, paternalistic attitude of the West. And he seemed to prove it when he refused to attend the Russia-Africa summit in June 2023. But then came the twist. A few months later, shock rippled through the continent when Ruto turned up at the Italy-Africa summit in January 2024. There he was, standing in line with 24 other African leaders, all waiting to greet Italy's Prime Minister, Giorgia Meloni. He wore a big smile, as though nothing had changed. And when it came time for the official family photo, Ruto stood just steps away from the AU chair, Azali Assoumani, and the AU Commission boss, Moussa Faki. A man who once vowed never to kneel to foreign powers, was right back where he said he'd never be. What a shame. The truth is, President Ruto didn't skip the Russia summit out of principle. It wasn't about keeping his word. He wanted to prove something, that he was a dependable ally of the West, and the West has started calling him just that. In fact, the former president of the United States granted Kenya the special status of a non-NATO ally, all because Ruto has become, in many ways, an eager messenger for American interests. He even offered Kenyan security forces to step into Haiti on behalf of the US. Those troops have been there since 2024, and what have they achieved? Absolutely nothing. Meanwhile, back home, Kenyans are fighting to survive under crushing economic hardship. Prices keep rising. Jobs are scarce. Families are struggling to put food on the table. Yet, instead of facing these problems head-on, President Ruto spends his time jetting around the globe, attending flashy meetings with Western leaders, meetings that bring no real benefits to ordinary Kenyans. The only plan he's offered to fix the economy is to follow strict policies laid down by the IMF after borrowing huge sums of money. But it's no surprise what's happened next. Those IMF-driven policies have only deepened the suffering of everyday Kenyans, pushing them further into poverty and despair. And so the question grows louder. Whose president is William Ruto, really? The people's or the West's? It was the IMF's heavy hand that pushed President Ruto to introduce that outrageous tax bill last year, but the people of Kenya refused to bow. They poured into the streets, shouting, marching, demanding change. And against all odds, they won. The tax bill was scrapped, but that victory was only one battle in a much bigger war. Because across Kenya, frustration is boiling over. People are tired of President Ruto. They're so disillusioned that some have begun calling him the worst and most corrupt president in the world. And now, for many Kenyans, there's only one thing left to say: Ruto must go. He needs to disappear from the presidency for good. That's why the protests rage on, driven by hope that a new leader might finally rise, someone who will truly stand for the people. As one young Kenyan put it, the youth are unstoppable, because we've come to fight for our rights. We don't want bad leadership. Bad leadership. It's a curse that has haunted so much of the African continent, and it's not just Kenya. Just a week ago, hundreds of brave citizens took to the streets in Togo. They're demanding the resignation of a president who has made it clear he intends to rule until his dying day. The people of Togo and the opposition have called it what it is: a constitutional coup. The winds of change are blowing through Africa, and more, the people refuse to stay silent. Across Africa, military coups are becoming strangely acceptable to many citizens, especially after what's been unfolding in the Sahel. But the so-called constitutional coup happening in Togo, that's not what the people want. Because the problem isn't just that President Faure Gnassingbé wants to cling to power for life. It goes far deeper than that. Faure has been ruling Togo since 2005, after the death of his father, Eyadema Gnassingbé. Yes, you heard right. Before Faure ever stepped into office, his father had already ruled Togo since 1967. Think about that for a moment. A Togolese citizen born in 1967 would have lived their entire life under just one family's rule, the Gnassingbé dynasty. Isn't that unbelievable? But it's not merely the fact that the same family has held power for decades. It's that through all those years, Togo has not truly developed. The lives of ordinary citizens have barely improved. Under Faure's father, the people of Togo lived through hell. Eyadema's 38-year rule was notorious for corruption, embezzling public funds, siphoning the nation's wealth into his own pockets. He claimed to lead a democracy, but in truth, he held a tight grip over the military and used it as a weapon against his own people. One of the darkest chapters came on January 30th, 1993. On that day, sections of the military went on an 8-hour rampage in Lomé. Soldiers fired indiscriminately into crowds, killing at least 12 people. The terror was so intense that over 300,000 Togolese fled the capital. Many escaped into Benin, Ghana, or deeper into Togo's interior, desperate to find safety. This is the legacy that Faure Gnassingbé inherited, and tragically, one he seems determined to continue. When Eyadema Gnassingbé died, his son Faure stepped in to take his place. The military helped him seize control, ensuring the dynasty stayed alive. And just like his father, Faure chose the same path, clinging to power, no matter the cost. Yet, Togo is a country blessed with riches. Beneath its soil lie limestone, uranium, gold, and diamonds. For a nation of just 8 million people, these resources should have been enough to build prosperity, good schools, strong hospitals, and opportunities for all. But instead, Togo is one of the poorest countries in Africa. Ordinary people struggle every day to survive. The economy is fragile. Poverty hangs heavy over the nation. And through it all, President Faure Gnassingbé seems obsessed with only one thing: staying in power for life. It's heartbreaking. Why can't African leaders get their act together? Because if Faure is allowed to rule as prime minister or president for life, Togo will remain stuck, frozen in time for the next 20, 30, maybe even 40 years. This is why the people of Togo are rising up. They're demanding change. The government has tried to crush these protests with violence and fear. Security forces have unleashed aggressive tactics, leading to deaths and injuries among the brave Togolese who dare to speak out. But the people are not backing down. The protests continue, the chants grow louder, and it's only a matter of time before something breaks. And the wave of change won't stop in Togo, because sooner or later, it's coming for Ivory Coast too. For years, French media has painted Ivory Coast as a shining example of stability in West Africa. They love to credit this so-called stability to one man, President Alassane Ouattara. According to France, Ouattara is the leader who brought economic calm and progress to Ivory Coast, a steady hand in a region often rocked by turmoil. But there's a truth the French don't want the world to see. Things in Ivory Coast are far from stable. Because if everything were truly peaceful, why would citizens have poured into the streets to protest against Ouattara just 2 months ago? And again, even more recently. It's not hard to see why Ivorians are angry. President Ouattara has become the very symbol of French influence in West Africa. From the earliest days of his career, France has guided him, protected him, and paved his path all the way to the presidency in 2011. Now, he's been in power for nearly 14 years. For a while, he pretended he had no interest in staying on. He hinted he might step aside, let someone new take over. But suddenly, all that changed. Now, Ouattara has made it crystal clear. He's running again in the upcoming elections this October. And the people of Ivory Coast are asking themselves a simple question. How long will they be forced to live under France's chosen leader? This is why the people are angry. Ivorians have grown tired of the man once hailed as their economic savior. Alassane Ouattara, backed by France, promised progress and prosperity. But for many, those promises feel empty. Despite his reputation as an economist, life for ordinary Ivorians has hardly changed. Ivory Coast, the world's largest producer of cocoa beans, should be one of Africa's success stories. Yet the nation remains stuck under the weight of a life presidency and scars left by post-election violence. Poverty is everywhere. More than half the people survive on just $1.22 a day. Women suffer most, making up more than half the unemployed. At least 12% of Ivorians struggle to find enough food. In the 2019 UN Human Development Index, Ivory Coast sits at a bleak rank, 165 out of 189. The same goes for gender equality. But Ouattara's failures go beyond his own borders. He's become a puppet, helping France tighten its grip on West Africa. In one of our earlier investigations, we exposed how France used Ouattara's government to stir unrest in Burkina Faso. We all remember the attempted coup against President Traoré. Burkinabe authorities claim the plotters fled across the border into Ivory Coast, where they've now set up their base. It's tragic to see an African leader willing to become an agent of chaos in another African nation. Pathetic and deeply heartbreaking. With all this, one thing is clear. If Ivory Coast hopes for a better future, the puppet president has to go and never return. Because if Alassane Ouattara manages to win the upcoming election, the country could be staring at the rise of yet another African president for life. And speaking of presidents for life, if you think Togo has it bad, wait until you hear about Equatorial Guinea. This small country of just 1.5 million people has known only 2 leaders since gaining independence in the 1960s. And the current man in charge, President Teodoro Obiang, has held power for an astonishing 46 years. 46 years, and he shows no sign of stepping down. In July 2003, the country's only state-run radio made a shocking declaration. It announced that President Obiang was the country's god, with all power over men and things. The broadcast claimed he was in constant contact with the Almighty and could decide to kill without anyone calling him to account or going to hell. This is the reality of the second longest serving president in the world. Obiang seized power after overthrowing his own uncle, Francisco Macias. His first act as president was brutal and symbolic. He had his uncle tried in a makeshift court, suspended in a metal cage above a crowd. The verdict? Death, pronounced 101 times. That is the chilling legacy of Equatorial Guinea's ruler. This atrocious act speaks volumes about the kind of leader Teodoro Obiang truly is. People often say military regimes are the worst because they rule with absolute power, but Obiang runs a so-called democracy and still stands as one of Africa's most ruthless autocrats. His government has crushed civil society, silenced political opposition. In all of Equatorial Guinea, out of a 170-member parliament, the opposition holds just one seat, only one. And anyone suspected of siding with the opposition risks arrest. Many end up locked away for months, sometimes years. Take Joaquin Elo Ayeto. He was thrown in jail simply for criticizing government spending. Obiang's grip on power has allowed him and his inner circle to dodge justice. They've amassed staggering personal fortunes, all while international investigations pile up. Yet, despite the evidence, the West, especially the US and France, keeps dealing with his government. They know how repressive his rule is, but still, they look the other way. For almost 46 years, the people of Equatorial Guinea have lived under the weight of fear and silence. And the haunting question remains, what can they possibly do? Like many African nations blessed with natural resources, Equatorial Guinea struck oil in the 1990s. And on paper, that changed everything. Unlike other African countries trapped among the poorest in the world, Equatorial Guinea boasts one of the highest per capita incomes on the continent. But here's the catch, it's only on paper, because behind those numbers lies a grim reality. More than 70% of the population still lives below the poverty line. Human rights are among the worst in the world. Half the people lack access to safe drinking water. And in 2015, more than half of school-age children were out of school. Meanwhile, while ordinary citizens struggle to survive, the political elite live in jaw-dropping luxury. A few years ago, an investigation exposed a stunning truth. 2 yachts, reportedly owned by the government of Equatorial Guinea, were being used for private pleasure by the president's eldest son, Teodoro Obiang. Those yachts are worth a combined $250 million. That's more than the entire amount Equatorial Guinea spent on health and education in 2011. Just imagine that. The president's son has become infamous for his taste in extravagance, so much so that foreign investigators couldn't ignore it anymore. In 2017, a French court convicted him in absentia. The charge? Stealing more than 100 million euros from Equatorial Guinea's public budget. He spent it in France on a $29 million mansion, on 18 luxury cars, priceless artworks, glittering jewelry, designer clothes worth a fortune. Yet, despite all this, he was appointed vice president right after a French judge ruled the case against him could move to trial. But here's the twist. His father, President Obiang, is no stranger to luxury himself. His personal shopping list reads like a billionaire's fantasy. A $35 million mansion perched in Malibu, a $36 million private jet, reportedly fitted with solid gold taps. In 2004, shocking revelations came to light. Obiang had been siphoning massive sums of state money out of Equatorial Guinea, stashing it away in private bank accounts across the US and Switzerland. One bank, Washington-based Riggs Bank, paid the price. They were fined $25 million for willingly handling the dirty money flowing from overseas crimes. This is the true cost of power in Equatorial Guinea. It's heartbreaking to see the people of Equatorial Guinea forced to live under such a cruel and greedy regime. If anything is going to change, the people themselves must rise up and push their president out of power. But here's the question that haunts the nation. Will they dare to stand and fight? It's the same question hanging over the citizens of Cameroon as the country heads into an election this October. When coups began sweeping across West Africa, Cameroon's president, Paul Biya, took no chances. He quickly reshuffled the top ranks of the military. The reason was simple: fear. Biya knows the wave of coups might crash into Cameroon and sweep him out of power. And losing power is something Paul Biya has no intention of doing. The term "president for life" fits him perfectly. Biya has ruled Cameroon for about 43 years, since 1982. That makes him the second longest serving president in the world. And like Obiang, he shows no sign of stepping down. Instead, he's declared he will contest the upcoming election. And if he does, few doubt what the outcome will be. When Paul Biya first came to power, the people of Cameroon stood behind him. They believed in his promises of democracy and forgiveness for political prisoners. For a moment, there was hope. But everything changed in 1984 when his own presidential guard attempted a coup. From that day on, Biya became autocratic and brutal. Hundreds of people were killed as his regime crushed dissent, especially in the north of the country. Despite holding absolute power, Biya has become infamous for ruling Cameroon from abroad. He spends much of his time traveling with his entourage of ministers and aides, often staying in Switzerland. In Geneva, he lives in one of the city's most luxurious hotels, all funded by the people of Cameroon. Back home, his council of ministers meets only 3 or 4 times a year. Decisions come slowly, and the country has suffered for it. It wasn't always this way. In 1980, Cameroon was the world's 4th largest cocoa producer, boasting a growth rate of 13%. It was even classified as a middle-income country. But since 1986, the nation has slipped into poverty, with failing infrastructure and widespread corruption. Press freedom has all but vanished. State television is tightly controlled by Biya's loyalists, and the few independent media outlets that remain risk bans and shutdowns if they dare to criticize the government. This is the heavy cost Cameroon has paid under Paul Biya's decades-long rule. In 2007, Paul Biya changed the rules of the game. He revised the constitution to remove presidential term limits. The move sparked outrage across Cameroon. People poured into the streets in revolt. The government responded with violence. Hundreds of protesters were killed. Thousands were thrown into prison. Despite the bloodshed, the constitution was changed, and Biya stayed in power, as he does to this day. Even now, though he's grown old and shows clear signs of failing health, Biya insists he will run in the next election. And after reshuffling the military, some wonder if there's any real hope left of removing him from office. No one knows how this will end, but one truth remains. Paul Biya must go if Cameroon is ever to have a chance at true growth and freedom, and only the people can make that happen. What do you think? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you found this story important, don't forget to like, comment, and share this video.